The late afternoon sun slanted through the courthouse windows, casting long golden rays across the polished marble floor. Outside in the parking lot, the rumble of a motorcycle engine cut through the quiet suburban air before falling silent. Raymond Mitchell eased his weathered frame off the seat of his 1980 Harley-Davidson Electra Glide. The bike was meticulously maintained despite its age, much like the man himself. At 84, Raymond moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had spent a lifetime being careful with his movements, conserving energy for when it truly mattered. He removed his helmet, revealing a crown of silver hair, cut short in the same military style he had worn for over half a century. His face, tanned and lined like a topographical map, betrayed little emotion as he gazed up at the county courthouse. He was not a man who intimidated easily. Not after what he had seen, not after what he had done. But courthouses had a way of making even the innocent feel guilty. Raymond adjusted his faded denim jacket with a practiced tug. The left breast bore 3 neat rows of military ribbons, and hanging just below them on a light blue ribbon was a star-shaped medal that caught the sunlight. His fingers brushed across them briefly, a habit formed over decades, as if to confirm they were still there. The medal felt cool against his fingertips. Inside the courthouse, in a wood-paneled office that smelled of furniture polish and old books, Judge Warren Hargrove sat at his desk staring at a photograph. The picture, housed in a simple silver frame, showed a younger man in desert camouflage standing beside a helicopter, squinting into the harsh Middle Eastern sun. Captain Thomas Hargrove. Missing in action, Iraq, 1991. Operation Desert Storm. Warren placed the photograph face down on his desk, a ritual he performed every day before court. He adjusted his black robes and straightened his tie, checking his reflection in the small mirror on his office wall. At 58, he cut an imposing figure. Harvard-educated, politically connected, with piercing eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. The gold watch on his wrist and the Harvard ring on his finger were calculated displays of his accomplishments. His clerk knocked softly on the door. "Your Honor, the afternoon docket is ready." "Thank you, Andrea. Simple traffic violations today, correct, should be straightforward." "Yes, Your Honor, although there is one case with a public defender." Warren sighed. Wonderful. Another waste of taxpayer money on someone who can't follow simple traffic laws." He rose from his chair, pulling his judicial robe tighter around his shoulders like armor. "Let's get this over with." Courtroom C of the Oak Ridge County Courthouse was modest but imposing, with high ceilings and wooden pews that creaked when people shifted their weight. The gallery was sparsely populated with people waiting for their cases to be called. Most stared at their phones, avoiding eye contact with each other or the court officers that stood at attention near the judge's bench. Melissa Torres sat at the defense table reviewing her notes. At 32, she was still relatively new to her role as a public defender, but the dark circles under her eyes spoke of someone who had already seen too many late nights and impossible caseloads. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore a simple navy suit that had seen better days. She believed in the system, despite its flaws, believed that everyone deserved a fair chance, even for something as mundane as a traffic violation. She looked up as Raymond Mitchell entered the courtroom. There was something about him that made her pause. It wasn't his age, though, that was notable. It wasn't his perfectly straight posture, unusual for someone of his years. It was his eyes, clear gray blue like a winter sky. They held a depth of experience that seemed to take in everything without revealing anything in return. "Mr. Mitchell," she asked, rising to her feet. "I'm Melissa Torres, your court-appointed attorney." Raymond nodded once, a crisp, economical movement. "Ma'am." His voice was quiet but carried a weight to it like stones worn smooth by a river. "Your case is fairly straightforward. You were ticketed for running a stop sign and exceeding the speed limit by 20 miles per hour. Since this is your 3rd violation in 5 years, the judge might be a bit harsh. My recommendation is that we plead guilty with an explanation and request traffic school." Raymond listened without interruption, his hands resting calmly on the table. He wore no rings, but his knuckles bore the calluses of a man who had worked with his hands his entire life. "The court will now come to order." The bailiff's voice boomed through the room as Judge Warren Hargrove entered, his robes swirling around him. Everyone stood until he took his seat. "Be seated," he commanded, scanning the courtroom with a practiced eye. He shuffled through the papers before him, then peered over his reading glasses. "First case, the state versus Raymond Mitchell. Charges are failure to stop at a stop sign and exceeding posted speed limit. How do you plead? Oh, Melissa rose smoothly. Your Honor, my client pleads guilty with an explanation. Judge Hargrove barely glanced at her before turning his attention to Raymond, who had remained seated. The defendant will rise when addressed by this court. Raymond stood slowly but with dignity, his back straight, eyes focused on the state flag hanging behind the judge, rather than on Hargrove himself. The judge noticed and frowned slightly. Mr. Mitchell, do you understand the charges against you? Yes, Your Honor. Raymond's voice was quiet but clear. Judge Hargrove was about to move on when his eyes fell on the ribbons and medal adorning Raymond's jacket. He paused, his expression shifting from professional detachment to something harder, more personal. Are those supposed to be real? The question hung in the air, laced with casual disdain. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted perceptibly. A few people in the gallery looked up from their phones, suddenly interested in the proceedings. Melissa felt her pulse quicken, sensing the conversation veering into dangerous territory. Your Honor, she began, my client's service record has no bearing on this case. Judge Hargrove waved a dismissive hand, not even gracing her with a glance. His eyes remained fixed on Raymond. I'm sure it doesn't. I'm just curious. It's quite a collection for a man who can't seem to remember basic traffic laws. His lips curled into what might charitably be called a smile. Let me guess you bought them at a surplus store, a little costume jewelry, to impress the folks at the VFW. A few nervous snickers emerged from the back of the courtroom, but most observers shifted uncomfortably. Raymond Mitchell remained perfectly still, his gaze unwavering from the flag. He wasn't angry or insulted. He seemed to be somewhere else entirely, a place of profound and unshakable calm. I asked you a question, sir. The judge pressed, his voice rising slightly. He enjoyed this, the small-town power of his position, the ability to dismantle a person piece by piece under the guise of judicial authority. Are you going to answer me, or are you as deaf as you are decorated? Melissa stood up straighter, her face flushing with anger. Your Honor, this is inappropriate. Mr. Mitchell is a veteran and deserves our respect. Respect is earned, counselor. Hargrove shot back, his voice like the crack of a whip. And parading around with a chest full of tin doesn't automatically earn it in my courtroom. Now, Mr. Mitchell, for the last time, where did you get the medals? Raymond's gaze slowly lowered from the flag to meet the judge's eyes. His voice, when it came, was quiet but carried surprising weight. They were given to me. The simplicity of the answer seemed to enrage the judge further. It offered no purchase for his mockery. Given to you by whom? The costume shop manager. He leaned back in his large leather chair, a caricature of smug authority. Let's be clear. I am tired of men of a certain generation thinking a uniform they wore half a century ago gives them a free pass. You ran a stop sign. You were clocked at 20 miles over the limit. And you stand here in this ridiculous jacket as if it's some sort of shield. I find it insulting to the real heroes who served. Each word was a calculated blow designed to humiliate. Melissa could feel tension coiling in her own body, a spring of outrage ready to release. She looked at her client. Raymond's hands, gnarled with age and speckled with liver spots, rested calmly on the defense table. He didn't fidget. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, absorbing the judge's venom without a flicker of expression. As Judge Hargrove spoke of real heroes, Raymond's right hand moved almost imperceptibly to touch the star-shaped medal hanging from the blue ribbon. For a fleeting second, his clear eyes clouded over, seeing not the sterile courtroom, but something far away in distance in time. The harsh desert night of Kuwait on 91. The air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of burning oil fields. The deafening chatter of machine gun fire stitching a line in the sand inches from where he lay. Private Roberts, barely 21 leg, shredded by enemy fire, eyes wide with terror and pain. I don't want to die, sir. Please, I don't want to die. Raymond, then a captain, dragging the young soldier across open ground as tracer rounds lit up the night sky, feeling the hot, wet soak of blood through his uniform, his lungs burning with each breath, sand in his mouth, in his eyes. The desperate, singular focus, get to the medevac chopper. Get this boy home. The memory vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving Raymond back in the silent, tense courtroom. He blinked slowly, his composure unbroken. Only his breathing had changed, becoming just a fraction deeper, a little more measured. Judge Hargrove, unaware of the private war playing out behind Raymond's eyes, pointed a manicured finger at the most prominent medal, the one that hung slightly apart from the others on the blue ribbon. Especially that one. The gall to wear a replica of the Medal of Honor. Do you have any idea what that represents? Old man, the blood and sacrifice it stands for? You wearing that as a slap in the face to every person who ever served honorably. Melissa watched the exchange, her heart pounding with helpless fury. She saw the judge's cruelty, the crowd's cowed silence, and Raymond's incredible, almost unnerving stoicism. She looked down at the case file. Raymond Mitchell, a few prior speeding tickets over the last 20 years. Nothing else. Address, social security number, date of birth. On the intake form in the box marked military service, Raymond had simply written yes. He hadn't specified a branch, a rank, or a single honor. Judge Hargrove's voice cut through her thoughts. "Take the jacket off," he commanded. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. This was no longer about a traffic ticket. This was a public stripping of dignity. "Your Honor, you can't be serious," Melissa pleaded, her voice trembling slightly. "I am perfectly serious, counselor. This is my courtroom. The defendant will show it the proper respect. That display is a distraction. Take it off, Mr. Mitchell, or I will find you in contempt." The bailiff, a burly man who had seen his share of courtroom drama, took a hesitant step forward. His eyes met Raymond's, and for a moment he looked uncertain, even apologetic. Raymond did not move. He did not look at the bailiff or the judge. He looked at the medals on his own chest, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on the one hanging from the blue ribbon. He seemed to be listening to a distant echo, a sound no one else in the room could hear. His silence was his answer. It was a profound and unyielding no. "Fine," the judge spat, his face turning a blotchy red. "Bailiff add a charge of contempt of court and a $500 fine. Maybe that will get his attention." Melissa frantically flipped through her notes, searching for any legal precedent to stop this abuse of power. As she did, her eyes caught a small pin on Raymond's jacket collar that she hadn't noticed before. It was a simple metal crest, unlike the more ornate medals on his chest. Something about it seemed familiar, though she couldn't place it. "Your Honor," she said, standing, "may I have a moment to confer with my client?" Judge Hargrove waved his hand dismissively. "Make it quick. We have other cases to get through today." Melissa leaned in close to Raymond. "Mr. Mitchell, I know this is difficult, but perhaps we should comply for now and file a formal complaint later. I don't want to see you face additional penalties." Raymond turned his head slightly to look at her, really seeing her for the first time. There was no fear in his eyes, only a deep, profound weariness. "It's not about the jacket, miss," he said softly, "or even the medals." "Then what is it about?" "Dignity. Can't buy it, can't sell it, and no one can take it from you unless you let them." Melissa nodded slowly, understanding the washing over. "And is there anyone I can call from your old unit, perhaps?" Raymond gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. "It was a long time ago. Most of them are gone now." She noticed the pin again, trying to place it. "That pin on your collar. What unit is that from?" For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched Raymond's lips. "Special Forces? Delta." Melissa felt her breath catch. Delta Force, the most elite special operations unit in the U.S. military. Not just veterans, but legends. "Your Honor," she said, turning back to the judge, "I need to step out for a moment. I need to retrieve a file from my office that's relevant to this case." Judge Hargrove looked at his watch with exaggerated impatience. "Do what you want, counselor. Your client isn't going anywhere. In fact, I'm beginning to think a psychological evaluation might be in order. A delusional old man playing dress-up with fake military honors could be a danger to himself or others." Melissa fought to keep her expression neutral, though her hands trembled with anger. "I'll be right back." "Your Honor." She hurried from the courtroom, her heels clicking frantically on the polished floor. She didn't have a file to get. She had something far more important. The hallway outside was quiet, most of the day's cases already concluded. Melissa ducked into an empty alcove, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. She quickly searched for Delta Force insignia and compared the images to what she'd seen on Raymond's collar. It was a perfect match. This was no costume, no game. If Raymond Mitchell had been in Delta Force, he wasn't just any veteran. He was among the most highly trained soldiers in American military history. And that Medal of Honor, could it possibly be real? She found a general number for Fort Bragg, the headquarters for Delta Force. It was a wild gamble, a shot in the dark. She dialed, her heart racing. A board-sounding specialist answered the phone. Fort Bragg Public Affairs Office. My name is Melissa Torres, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm a public defender in Oak Ridge County. I have a client here, a veteran. He's in trouble. Ma'am, we can't get involved in civilian legal matters, the specialist said, his voice flat with practiced disinterest. I know, I understand, but his name is Raymond Mitchell. He's being held in contempt of court because the judge doesn't believe his medals are real. Ma'am, I can't. He's wearing a Delta Force pin, please. His name is Raymond Mitchell. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The bored tone was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused silence. Spell the last name for me. Mitchell. First name Raymond. She heard the sound of furious typing, then a sharp intake of breath. The voice that came back was completely different. It was crisp, urgent, and filled with an energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. Ma'am, what courtroom are you in? Courtroom C, Oak Ridge County Courthouse. Do not let your client leave. Do not let them take him anywhere. We are on our way. The line went dead. Melissa stood frozen in the alcove, her phone still pressed to her ear, the specialist's final words echoing in the sudden silence. We are on our way. Hope, fierce and bright, surged through her. Help was coming. Back in the courtroom, Judge Hargrove was growing increasingly irritated. He checked his watch again, drumming his fingers on the bench. Bailiff, where is Ms. Torres? I'm not sure, Your Honor. She said she was getting a file. The judge turned his attention back to Raymond, who continued to stand perfectly still at the defense table, his bearing unchanged. Mr. Mitchell, I'm beginning to think you're wasting this court's time deliberately. I have half a mind to add additional charges. Raymond said nothing, his eyes once again fixed on the state flag behind the judge. His silence seemed to infuriate Hargrove even more. Given your refusal to comply with a direct order from this court, Hargrove began, savoring each word, and your clear state of delusion regarding your past exploits. I am not only holding you in contempt, but I am also concerned for your mental fitness. He let that hang in the air, a poisonous cloud. Therefore, I am ordering a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. The bailiff will remand you into the custody of the county sheriff's department, who will transport you to the state hospital for assessment. This was the ultimate degradation. Not just a fine, not just jail time, but a declaration that Raymond Mitchell was crazy, that his life, his service, his honor were the fictions of a broken mind. The gavel was in his hand. He raised it high, the final punctuation mark on his petty tyranny. Meanwhile, the phone call that ended in Washington State created a shockwave that moved at the speed of light. The specialist who took Melissa's call didn't hesitate. He bypassed 3 levels of his own command, patching the call directly to the office of the base's commanding officer, a battle-hardened colonel. The colonel listened, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his desk. The moment he heard the name Raymond Mitchell, he stood. Hold the line, he commanded, and without another word, he strode out of his office and down the hall to a larger, more opulent suite of rooms, not even bothering to knock. Inside, General William Blackwood was reviewing logistics reports. He was a man carved from granite and steel with 3 stars on his shoulders and a gaze that could peel paint. He looked up annoyed at the intrusion. Sir, the colonel said, out of breath. We have a code monument. The general's eyes sharpened. Code monument was an unofficial, unwritten protocol. It was reserved for a handful of living legends, men whose service was so extraordinary that the institution itself was honor-bound to protect them, no matter the circumstance. It had not been activated in over a decade. Who? The general asked, his voice a low rumble. Colonel Raymond Mitchell, sir. General Blackwood was out of his chair before the colonel finished the sentence. The logistics reports scattered across his desk, forgotten. A look of disbelief followed by a thunderous anger passed over his face. Where is he? Oak Ridge County Courthouse, sir. A local judge is holding him in contempt, accusing him of faking his medals. Specifically, the colonel added, his voice filled with disgust, the Medal of Honor. The general's jaw tightened until a muscle bunched in his cheek. He moved with a speed and purpose that belied his age. He pointed a finger at the colonel. Get me a chopper to the nearest airfield in a car waiting. Full honor guard escort dress uniforms. I want to be there in under an hour. He turned to his aide, who was already scrambling to his feet. "Get me everything on Judge Hargrove of Oak Ridge County. I want to know where he went to school, who he owes favors to, and what he had for breakfast." To the colonel, he gave one final chilling order. "And get the Secretary of the Army on the line. Tell him a national treasure is being publicly humiliated by a man who doesn't deserve to shine his boots." Back in courtroom C, the air had grown thick and stagnant with Judge Hargrove's self-satisfaction. He had made his point. He had cowed the young public defender and was now preparing to deliver his final crushing blow to the silent old man before him. Melissa had returned to the defense table, her face pale but her eyes holding a new defiant spark that the judge chose to ignore. The gavel was raised high. He never got to bring it down. A muffled commotion from the hallway outside interrupted him. The heavy oak doors to the courtroom burst open, swinging inward with such force that they banged against the walls. Two soldiers, ramrod straight in immaculate army dress blues, entered the room. They moved with a synchronized, powerful grace, one taking up a position on the left of the entrance, the other on the right. They stood at perfect parade rest, their faces impassive, their eyes fixed straight ahead. The courtroom fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Judge Hargrove froze his gavel, still held aloft, his mouth slightly agape. Then a third man entered. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark green uniform perfectly pressed, the jacket glittering with its own impressive array of medals. 3 silver stars gleamed on each of his shoulders. It was General William Blackwood. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the gallery. His eyes, sharp and intense, scanned the room until they found their target. He began to walk down the central aisle, his polished boots making a sound like measured, deliberate heartbeats on the tiled floor. Click, click. Each step was an indictment. Each step shifted the balance of power in the room. The air crackled with an authority that made the judges seem like a child's tantrum. General Blackwood stopped directly in front of the defense table, less than 2 feet from Raymond Mitchell. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other. A universe of shared understanding passed between them in that silent gaze. The general's hard face softened with a look of profound respect and something akin to reverence. Then, in a move that sent a shockwave through the entire courtroom, General William Blackwood snapped to the sharpest, most precise position of attention. His right hand came up in a salute, so crisp, so perfect, it seemed to cut the air. His gloved fingers touched the brim of his hat, his arm a rigid line of respect. "Colonel Mitchell," the general's voice boomed clear and strong, filling every corner of the silent room. "It is an honor to be in your presence, sir." He held the salute, his eyes locked on Raymond's. Slowly, as if rousing from a long dream, Raymond Mitchell straightened his shoulders. The weariness seemed to fall away from him, replaced by an echo of the soldier he had once been. He brought his own hand up his movement, stiff with age but no less precise, and returned the salute. Judge Warren Hargrove, his face drained of color, lowered his gavel without bringing it down. The power in the room had shifted irrevocably. Whatever was happening, he had lost control of his courtroom, and he knew it. He could only watch as the scene unfolded before him, a scene that would shatter his understanding of the world and ultimately change the course of his life forever. Judge Hargrove finally found his voice sputtering with confusion and outrage. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you? I am in the middle of a judicial proceeding." General Blackwood slowly lowered his hand, but his eyes never left Raymond. Only after Raymond had lowered his own hand did the general turn his head. He pinned Judge Hargrove with a gaze so cold and furious it seemed to drop the temperature in the room by 20 degrees. "The meaning, Your Honor," the general said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is that you are in the presence of a hero of the Republic, and you are about to learn a lesson in respect." He took a step toward the dais, pulling a folded piece of paper from his inner pocket. Every movement was precise, deliberate, a man who had spent decades in command and expected to be obeyed without question. "You question this man's medals. Let me enlighten you." He began to read, his voice resonating with pride and barely contained anger. "Colonel Raymond Mitchell enlisted United States Army 1958. Served with distinction for 30 years, 3 combat tours. Founding member of Delta Force under Colonel Charles Beckwith." He paused, letting the weight of the legendary unit's name settle in the room. People were sitting up straighter, their faces a mixture of awe and shame. A local reporter in the back was scribbling frantically in his notepad. "Awards and decorations include the Bronze Star with V for Valor 3 awards. the Silver Star 2 awards, the Distinguished Service Cross, the Purple Heart 4 awards. With each medal named, a new wave of shock rippled through the gallery. The bailiff, a veteran himself, had unconsciously shifted to a position of attention, his earlier uncertainty replaced by undisguised respect. "And this one," the general said, his voice dropping as he looked at the medal on the blue ribbon, "this gaudy piece of tin you so casually dismissed. This is the Medal of Honor awarded to then Captain Mitchell for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." The general's voice took on a formal cadence, reciting words that had been read at a White House ceremony 3 decades earlier. On February 26, 1991, near Kuwait City, Captain Mitchell, with complete disregard for his own safety, single-handedly charged 2 enemy machine gun nests, eliminating them both, and proceeded to carry 3 wounded comrades across 200 meters of open fire-swept terrain to a medical evacuation point. He then returned to the fight. The general folded the paper, his movements sharp and deliberate. He stared at the judge. "This man's jacket holds more honor than this entire courthouse, yourself included. He is not a defendant. He is a national treasure, and you and your arrogance saw fit to humiliate him." Judge Hargrove's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white. He looked small and powerless behind his large, imposing bench. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was, for the first time in his professional life, utterly and completely silenced. The gavel lay forgotten on his desk. The general turned back to Raymond. "Colonel, on behalf of the United States Army and a grateful nation, I apologize for the indignity you have been subjected to today." He then turned his icy gaze back to the judge, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "As for you, Your Honor, you seem to have a problem with veterans. I would suggest you rectify that. I have already been on the phone with the office of your state's governor, as well as the head of the Judicial Conduct Commission. They are very, very interested in today's transcript. I imagine your career of public service is about to come to a rather abrupt end." The finality in his voice was absolute. He had not just won the argument. He had dismantled the judge's entire world in less than 5 minutes. Melissa Torres stood beside Raymond, her eyes wide with disbelief at what she was witnessing. She had hoped for help when she made that call, but nothing could have prepared her for this dramatic intervention, for the revelation that her quiet, unassuming client was a living legend. It was Raymond who broke the ensuing silence. He placed a gentle hand on the general's arm. "Bill, Carl," he said, his voice soft but clear. "He's a man who made a mistake, a bad one, but he just didn't know." He looked up at the judge, not with anger or triumph, but with a surprising gentleness. General Blackwood looked as if he might argue, but something in Raymond's expression stopped him. He respected this man too much to contradict him, even in this. The gallery watched in stunned silence as Raymond Mitchell, rather than gloating in his vindication, extended a measure of grace to the man who had just tried to strip him of his dignity. It was a moment of stunning moral clarity, a glimpse into the character of a man who had faced far worse than an arrogant judge and emerged with his humanity intact. Melissa leaned toward Raymond, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Mitchell, there's no need to defend him after what he just did to you." Raymond turned to her with the same gentle expression. "Dignity works both ways, miss. Taking his won't give me more of mine." Judge Hargrove, still visibly shaken, and finally managed to speak. I had no idea. I didn't know." "That's right, you didn't know," Raymond replied. "And that's the point. None of us ever really knows what battles someone else has fought." An uncomfortable silence fell over the courtroom. The judge, stripped of his usual authority, looked lost. The general, though calmer, still radiated cold fury. It was Raymond who seemed most at peace, as if the storm raging around him was of no particular concern. Melissa, sensing that the immediate crisis had passed, decided to focus on the practical matters at hand. "Your Honor, given these extraordinary circumstances, I move that all charges against my client be dismissed immediately." Judge Hargrove nodded quickly, eager for any path forward that might mitigate his humiliation. "Motion granted. The charges of traffic violations and contempt are dismissed. Case closed." He brought down his gavel with a tentative tap, as if afraid to make too much noise. The general wasn't satisfied. "That's not enough, Your Honor. A public apology would seem appropriate." Before the judge could respond, a new voice spoke up from the back of the courtroom. I'd like to hear that too. The voice belonged to an older man in a well-tailored suit who had entered silently during the confrontation. Especially since I'll be discussing your judicial future with the commission first thing tomorrow morning. All heads turned to see State Supreme Court Justice Edward Klein standing at the back of the courtroom, his expression grave. The state's highest judicial authority had somehow gotten wind of the situation and arrived to witness it personally. Judge Hargrove's face, already pale now, took on an ashen quality. His career was crumbling before his eyes. He stood, hands gripping the bench for support. Colonel Mitchell, he began, his voice thin and unsteady. I offer my sincere and unreserved apology for my behavior today. My words and actions were inexcusable. I showed a profound lack of respect, not only for your service, but for your person. I am deeply sorry. Raymond nodded once, accepting the apology without comment. The matter, as far as he was concerned, was settled. But Justice Klein wasn't finished. Hargrove, my chambers after court. We have much to discuss. As the crowd began to murmur, Melissa took the opportunity to gather her things and guide Raymond toward the exit. General Blackwood fell in beside them, along with the two soldiers who had accompanied him. Ray, the general said quietly as they walked, you should have called me. This never should have happened. Raymond shrugged slightly. It's just a traffic ticket, Bill. Not worth bothering the brass. The general shook his head, a mix of exasperation and admiration on his face. 30 years and you haven't changed a bit. Still the most stubborn, humble son of a gun I've ever met. They paused in the hallway outside the courtroom. Melissa watched as the two men, separated by rank but united by shared experiences she could only imagine, communicated in the shorthand of old soldiers. How's the leg? The general asked. Better than the alternative. And you're living where now? Small place on the edge of town. Garage big enough for the bike and a workshop. All I need. The general nodded, understanding what wasn't being said as much as what was. You deserve better than this, Ray. What happened in there? Raymond interrupted him with a gentle shake of his head. Water under the bridge, Bill. Let it go. Melissa, sensing an opportunity to learn more about her enigmatic client, cleared her throat softly. General Blackwood, how do you know Mr. Mitchell? The general looked at her with newfound appreciation. You're the one who called Fort Bragg. She nodded, suddenly self-conscious under his scrutiny. Then you've earned the right to know. This man, he gestured to Raymond, saved my life in Desert Storm. I was a captain, then pinned down with my unit. Ray was leading a Delta team that came in for extraction. When our chopper took fire and went down, he pulled us out one by one. Last man out, first man in. That's always been Ray Mitchell. Raymond looked uncomfortable with the praise, his eyes dropping to the floor. Just doing my job. Your job, the general said with a short laugh, was to command the extraction team, not to personally drag 7 men from a burning helicopter while under enemy fire. Melissa tried to reconcile the quiet elderly man beside her with the hero the general was describing. She had read about such men, seen movies about them, but had never expected to meet one, especially not in a routine traffic case. What happens now? She asked. The general straightened his uniform jacket. Now I make some calls to ensure that Judge Hargrove faces appropriate consequences for his behavior today. And then, he looked at Raymond with a mix of respect and concern. Then I'd like to buy an old friend dinner and catch up on 30 years. Raymond started to decline, but Melissa surprised herself by intervening. He accepts. Both men looked at her with raised eyebrows. Sorry, she said, flushing slightly, but Mr. Mitchell, you deserve to be celebrated, at least for one evening. Raymond studied her for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his weathered face. Seems I'm outnumbered. Dinner it is. The general clapped him on the shoulder. Excellent. I have a few matters to attend to first. Meet you at Antonio's at 7. Raymond nodded and the general departed with his escort, leaving Raymond and Melissa alone in the hallway. Thank you, Raymond said quietly. Not many would have done what you did. I just made a phone call, Mr. Mitchell. You recognize something worth fighting for. That's rare. They walked together toward the courthouse exit, an unlikely pair, the young public defender and the elderly war hero. As they passed through the main doors into the late afternoon sunlight, Melissa noticed a man sitting on a bench across the street, watching them intently. He was in his late 50s, well-dressed, with the hard eyes of someone who had seen too much. When he saw them emerge, he stood and began walking toward them. Mr. Mitchell, she said quietly, Do you know that man? Raymond followed her gaze, his body tensing almost imperceptibly as he recognized the approaching figure. Yes, I know him. The man stopped a few feet away, his eyes fixed on Raymond. Mitchell, been a long time. Not long enough, Hargrove. Melissa looked between the two men in confusion before understanding dawned. Hargrove, as in, Thomas Hargrove was my father, the man confirmed, never taking his eyes off Raymond. I'm Warren Hargrove. The judge in there is my son. The revelation hit Melissa like a physical blow. 3 generations connected by threads she couldn't yet see. But your father was reported missing in Desert Storm. Warren Hargrove's face tightened. Missing? Presumed dead. No body ever recovered. No medals awarded posthumously. Just a form letter thanking the family for his service. Raymond's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of old pain. Your father was a good man, a brave soldier. So I've heard, Warren said, his voice laced with old bitterness, though never from anyone who was there. Until now. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Melissa looked from one man to the other, sensing the weight of unspoken history. My son, Warren finally continued, grew up without a grandfather. He heard stories about war heroes who came home covered in glory. He never understood why his grandfather wasn't among them. It affected him. Raymond nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. That explains some things, but it doesn't excuse them. No, Warren agreed. It doesn't, but I'd like to understand what happened that day. The day my father disappeared. No one would ever tell us. Raymond looked at him for a long moment, assessing. Then he gestured to a nearby bench. It's a long story. And not all of it is mine to tell. Warren hesitated, then nodded and moved toward the bench. Raymond turned to Melissa. Thank you for everything today, Miss Torres, but this conversation should be private. Melissa understood she was being dismissed, but professional curiosity and genuine concern made her reluctant to leave. Are you sure you'll be all right? A ghost of a smile touched Raymond's lips. I've survived worse. She nodded, respecting his wishes. I'll see you at the courthouse tomorrow to finalize the dismissal of charges. As she walked away, she glanced back to see the 2 men sitting side by side on the bench, heads bent in serious conversation. 2 strangers connected by war loss and a history she could only guess at. Warren Hargrove listened intently as Raymond Mitchell began to speak, his voice low and measured, transporting them both back to the swirling sands of Kuwait 1991. Your father was with the 75th Ranger Regiment, attached to a Special Operations Task Force. I was leading a Delta unit on extraction duty. Our paths crossed during the push toward Kuwait City. As Raymond spoke, the years fell away, and he was once again Captain Mitchell, leading his team through the darkness of a desert night lit by burning oil wells. The radio call had come in near midnight. A Ranger unit pinned down, taking heavy fire, multiple casualties. Extraction required immediate. The coordinates placed them deep in enemy territory, surrounded by Iraqi Republican Guard positions. It was supposed to be a straightforward mission for your father's team. Gather intelligence, avoid contact, get out. But something went wrong. They stumbled into an enemy battalion headquarters. The firefight was intense. Warren's eyes never left Raymond's face as he described the hellish scene they encountered: tracer rounds cutting through the night sky, the deafening roar of helicopter rotors, the acrid smell of burning oil and cordite. We came in low, 2 Blackhawks. Your father had managed to get his wounded to a defensible position, but they were surrounded. As soon as we touched down, we started taking fire from multiple directions. Raymond paused, his right hand unconsciously moving to touch the Medal of Honor that hung from his jacket. The memory was still vivid, still painful after all these years. I led the first team out. We laid down covering fire while the medics started loading the wounded. Your father was everywhere at once, directing his men, firing at enemy positions, helping the injured. He was extraordinary. Warren's throat tightened at the description of his father, a man he had known only through photographs and the fading memories of a 12-year-old boy. We had almost everyone loaded when the RPG hit the lead helicopter. The pilot was killed instantly. The aircraft went down, hard fuel tanks igniting. Raymond's voice grew distant, his eyes focused on something Warren couldn't see. There were 7 men trapped in that burning helicopter. Your father and I, we didn't even speak. We just moved. Into the fire, into the bullets. One by one, we pulled them out. The memory of that night played out in vivid detail: the searing heat of the flames, the desperate screams of the trapped men, the steady mechanical work of dragging one body after another to safety. Private Roberts was the last one, leg nearly severed by shrapnel. Your father reached him, first started pulling him clear. That's when the second RPG hit. Warren tensed knowing they were approaching the moment that had defined his family's life for more than 3 decades. The explosion threw me clear. When I got back to my feet, your father and Roberts were gone. The helicopter was fully engulfed. I tried to go back in. Raymond's hand moved to his side where an old wound still ached in cold weather. The others held me back. There was nothing anyone could do. Warren was silent for a long moment, absorbing the account of his father's final moments. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. He died saving others. Raymond nodded slowly. He died as he lived, with courage and selflessness. Then why wasn't he recognized? Why no medals, no honors? Why was he just forgotten? A shadow passed over Raymond's face. The mission was classified. Black Ops. Officially, we were never there, and neither was your father's unit. The politics of war are seldom fair, Mr. Hargrove. Your father deserved better. They all did. Warren stared at the ground, processing decades of questions answered in minutes. My son, the judge, he grew up with this anger, this sense that his grandfather had been cheated of recognition. I think in his mind, every medal he sees on someone else is one his grandfather should have received. Understanding doesn't excuse his behavior today, Raymond said quietly but firmly. No, Warren agreed, it doesn't, but perhaps it explains it. They sat in silence for several minutes, and two men connected by the thread of a shared tragedy, separated by the different ways they had processed it. Finally, Warren spoke again. I'd like my son to hear this story, to understand what really happened. Would you be willing to tell him? Raymond considered the request. To revisit those memories again, to open old wounds for the sake of healing newer ones. It wasn't an easy thing to ask, but then easy had never been his way. Yes, he said simply. I'll tell him. Warren nodded, relief evident in his expression. Thank you. He's still inside meeting with Justice Klein. It won't be a pleasant conversation. Few important ones are easier, Raymond observed. As they sat there, the courthouse doors opened, and the younger Hargrove emerged. His shoulders slumped in defeat. He stopped short when he saw his father sitting with Raymond Mitchell. Warren stood, gesturing his son over. Warren Jr., come here. There's something you need to hear. The judge approached cautiously, his earlier arrogance replaced by a wary humility. The dressing down from Justice Klein had clearly been thorough. Your Honor, Raymond acknowledged him with a slight nod, neither friendly nor hostile. Your father thinks we should talk. About what? The younger Hargrove asked, his voice subdued. About your grandfather. About what really happened in Kuwait. The judge's eyes widened slightly. You knew my grandfather. I was with him when he died, Raymond said quietly. Saving others. Saving me. The simple statement hung in the air between them, profound in its implications. Judge Hargrove looked from Raymond to his father, confusion and disbelief warring on his face. That's not possible. We were told he went missing on a routine patrol, that there were no witnesses. That was the official story, Raymond confirmed. The truth was classified. Why should I believe you now? The question held no hostility, only genuine uncertainty. Raymond reached into his jacket and withdrew a worn leather wallet. From it, he removed a faded photograph, handling it with reverence before passing it to the judge. Judge Hargrove took it with careful hands. The photo showed two soldiers in desert camouflage, arms thrown around each other's shoulders, standing before a helicopter. One was a younger Raymond Mitchell. The other was undeniably Thomas Hargrove, the grandfather the judge had never met, but whose absence had shaped his life. He gave me that the day before, Raymond said softly. Said if anything happened to him, I should get it back to his family. I carried it all these years, meaning to find you. But the war ended, life moved on. I failed in that promise. For that, I am sorry. Judge Hargrove stared at the photograph, his hands trembling slightly. He looks just like Dad did at that age. Warren peered over his son's shoulder, his own eyes moistening at the sight of his father's face, frozen in time, young and vital and alive in a way that existed now only in memory. I've never seen this photo before, Warren said quietly. It was taken at Camp Doha the day before the mission, Raymond explained. A buddy of mine snapped it. Said we looked like brothers. The three men stood in silence, united in that moment by the tangible connection to a man long gone, but suddenly present among them again. "I'd like to hear the whole story," Judge Hargrove said, finally, a new humility in his voice. "About my grandfather. About what kind of man he really was." Raymond nodded. "I owe him that much. I owe all of you that much." As the sun began to set over the courthouse, casting long shadows across the square, Raymond Mitchell began to speak again. He told the story of Thomas Hargrove not as an abstraction or a memory, but as the living, breathing man he had known. The skilled soldier, the natural leader, the man who had faced death with courage and compassion. Judge Hargrove listened with rapt attention, his earlier arrogance replaced by a hunger to know the grandfather whose absence had left such a void in his life. In those moments, something shifted between the three men, a closing of a circle that had remained open for too long. By the time Raymond finished his account, dusk had fallen fully. The courthouse was nearly empty, most of the day's business concluded. "I understand now," Judge Hargrove said quietly, "why the medals meant so much to you, why you wouldn't take off the jacket." Raymond studied him for a moment. "The medals aren't the point, son. They're just reminders. Respect isn't something you demand with a gavel. It's something you give freely to the person standing in front of you, whether they're a general or a janitor. That's all the lesson there is." The judge nodded slowly, absorbing the gentle rebuke along with the wisdom behind it. "I've been taught an important lesson today, one I won't forget." "See that you don't," his father said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your grandfather would expect better." As Raymond Mitchell prepared to leave them, Judge Hargrove extended his hand. "Colonel Mitchell, I know an apology isn't enough, but I am truly sorry for my behavior today." Raymond took the offered hand, his grip still firm despite his years. "Apology accepted, Judge. We all make mistakes. The measure of a man is what he does after." With that simple philosophy, spoken from a lifetime of experience, Raymond Mitchell turned and walked away, his back straight, his gait measured but steady. His motorcycle waited in the parking lot, a machine from another era maintained with the same care and precision he had brought to every aspect of his long and extraordinary life. The Hargroves, father and son, watched him go, both men forever changed by their brief encounter with a quiet hero who had walked among them unrecognized. As Raymond started his motorcycle and rode away into the gathering darkness, neither man spoke. Some moments require silence, some lessons sink deeper, without words. The photograph of Thomas Hargrove, passed from son to father, a treasured relic finally finding its way home after decades lost in the shifting sands of time and memory. The evening air carried the first hint of autumn coolness as Raymond Mitchell guided his Harley through the quiet streets of Oak Ridge. The confrontation at the courthouse had left him drained in a way that combat never had. Battle was straightforward. You fought, you survived, or you didn't. But this kind of fight, with its tangle of emotions and old wounds reopened, was more complicated. He arrived at Antonio's restaurant 15 minutes early, a habit formed during decades of military punctuality. The restaurant was upscale, but not pretentious, housed in a converted Victorian home with warm lighting visible through leaded glass windows. Raymond parked his motorcycle and sat for a moment, gathering himself. He had changed clothes at his modest home, replacing the denim jacket with a simple navy blazer. The Medal of Honor and other decorations remained at home in their case. Tonight wasn't about medals or the past. It was about reconnecting with an old friend, though Raymond suspected General Blackwood had more in mind than a simple dinner. Inside, the maitre d' led Raymond to a private room at the back of the restaurant. General William Blackwood was already there now, dressed in civilian clothes, an expensive suit that fit his powerful frame perfectly. He stood as Raymond entered, a smile warming his usually stern features. "Ray," punctual as always. The two men shook hands, the greeting evolving naturally into a brief embrace. 30 years fell away in an instant. "Good to see you, Bill," Raymond said as they separated, "though I wish it had been under different circumstances." "Sit down before you fall down, you stubborn old war horse," Blackwood replied with gruff affection. "You look like hell." Raymond eased into his chair, his body betraying the fatigue he'd been fighting. "Been a long day." A waiter appeared with a bottle of scotch and two glasses. Blackwood dismissed him with a nod, then poured 2 fingers in each glass, sliding one toward Raymond. "Macallan 25, figure we've earned it." Raymond accepted the glass but didn't drink. "You didn't need to come all that way today, Bill. I could have handled Hargrove." Blackwood snorted. By standing there and letting him strip you of your dignity, that's not handling it, Ray. That's enduring it. And you've endured enough. It was just a traffic ticket. It was never about the ticket. It was about respect. Blackwood leaned forward, his eyes intense. When that public defender called Fort Bragg, do you know what happened? The entire chain of command went on high alert. General Sutherland himself called me. You know why? Because Raymond Mitchell is a living legend. The man who taught half the operators in Delta their craft. The man who wrote the book on hostage extraction. The man who saved my life and the lives of countless others. Raymond shifted uncomfortably. Praise had always made him uneasy. You disappeared after retirement, Blackwood continued. Fell off the grid. No reunions, no veterans events, no nothing. Why, Ray? Why cut yourself off from the people who respect you most? Raymond was silent for a long moment, staring into his untouched scotch. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but firm. The war ended for me a long time ago, Bill. I said my goodbyes. Made my peace. Did you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're still fighting something. Raymond's eyes lifted to meet his old friend's gaze. Maybe I am, but it's not a battle you can help me win. Before Blackwood could respond, the door opened and the waiter returned with menus. The conversation paused as they ordered the familiar ritual, providing a welcome respite from deeper waters. When they were alone again, Blackwood tried a different approach. Tell me about your life now. What does the great Raymond Mitchell do with his days? A small smile touched Raymond's lips. I fix things, motorcycles mostly, some antique clocks, anything mechanical that needs a patient hand. You always were good with your hands. It's quiet work, peaceful. Each machine has a logic to it, a reason why it stops working. Find that reason, fix it, and it runs again. Simple. Unlike people, Blackwood observed. Unlike people, Raymond agreed. They fell into an easier conversation than reminiscing about mutual acquaintances catching up on 30 years of life events. Blackwood spoke of his children, now grown with families of their own. Raymond listened more than he spoke, offering little about his own life beyond his work in his small repair shop. Their food arrived perfectly prepared, but largely ignored as the conversation deepened. Blackwood, despite the years of command that had taught him strategic patience, finally circled back to what was clearly his main purpose. The Pentagon is planning a series of events for the 30th anniversary of Desert Storm next year, he said, watching Raymond carefully. Honoring the veterans, especially those who received high decorations. They want you there, Ray, as a guest of honor. Raymond set down his fork. No, they'll insist. After what happened today, once the story gets out, and it will get out, there will be renewed interest in your service. The Medal of Honor recipients are a small, exclusive club, Ray. You can't hide forever. I'm not hiding. I'm living my life on my terms. Blackwood leaned back, studying his old friend. Is that what you call it? Because from where I sit, it looks an awful lot like a self-imposed exile. Raymond's expression hardened slightly. I've earned the right to choose how I live, Bill. I've paid whatever dues were required. No one's disputing that. But there's a new generation of soldiers who need to hear your stories, learn from your experiences. My stories aren't for public consumption. They belong to me and to the men who were there. A spark of frustration flashed in Blackwood's eyes. Many of whom are gone now. If you don't tell those stories, Ray, who will? When you're gone, what remains? Raymond didn't answer immediately. It was a question he had asked himself many times over the long, quiet years of his retirement. What would remain of Raymond Mitchell when he was gone? No wife, no children. Just memories fading with those who had known him and medals gathering dust in a drawer. I'll think about it, he finally conceded, though his tone suggested otherwise. Blackwood recognized the evasion but chose not to press further, at least for now. He raised his glass in a toast. To absent friends. Raymond lifted his own glass for the first time. To absent friends. As they drank, the door to the private dining room opened suddenly. One of the soldiers who had accompanied Blackwood to the courthouse earlier entered with urgent purpose. General, sir, I apologize for the interruption, but there's a situation. Blackwood straightened, instantly alert. What kind of situation, Sergeant? It's Judge Hargrove, sir. He's at the hospital. Heart attack. Raymond set down his glass, his eyes sharpening with concern. How bad? The sergeant hesitated, glancing at Blackwood, who nodded for him to continue. Critical, sir. It happened right after his meeting with State Supreme Court Justice Klein. He collapsed in the parking lot. His father was with him and called the ambulance. Raymond stood, his earlier fatigue forgotten. Which hospital? Oak Ridge Memorial, sir, but the family hasn't authorized. Thank you, Sergeant. That will be all. Blackwood dismissed him with the practiced authority of a man used to command. When they were alone again, Blackwood studied Raymond's face. You're going to the hospital, aren't you? Yes. Why, after how he treated you today, you owe him nothing. Raymond reached for his jacket. This isn't about owing Bill. It's about doing what's right. Blackwood sighed, recognizing the resolute expression on his friend's face. It was the same look he'd seen decades ago when Raymond had insisted on going back into a burning helicopter to search for survivors despite his own injuries. I'm coming with you. Raymond didn't argue. Together they left the restaurant. The elaborate meal barely touched the conversation unfinished. The drive to Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital took less than 20 minutes. Raymond led the way on his motorcycle, Blackwood following in his staff car. They arrived to find the emergency entrance brightly lit against the gathering darkness, ambulances and police cruisers parked in designated spaces. Inside the emergency waiting room was a study in controlled chaos. Nurses moving with efficient purpose, worried family members clustered in uncomfortable chairs, the antiseptic smell overlaying everything. Raymond approached the reception desk, conscious of the attention he and Blackwood were attracting. Warren Hargrove, he said to the receptionist, admitted earlier this evening with a heart attack. The young woman consulted her computer screen. Are you family, sir? Before Raymond could answer, a voice called from across the room. Colonel Mitchell, Warren Hargrove Sr., approached, his face drawn with worry. He looked years older than he had just hours earlier at the courthouse. Mr. Hargrove, Raymond acknowledged him with a nod. We heard about your son. How is he? They're working on him now, some kind of emergency procedure. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture of helpless anxiety. They're not telling me much. Is there anything we can do? Blackwood asked. Warren seemed to notice the general for the first time, taking in his imposing presence with a questioning look. General William Blackwood. Raymond introduced them. An old friend. He was with me when we heard about your son. The two men shook hands briefly. Thank you for coming, Warren said, but there's nothing anyone can do right now except wait. Raymond had spent much of his life waiting for orders for extraction, for the right moment to strike. He settled into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs with the patience of a man who had learned that some battles couldn't be rushed. Blackwood sat beside him, his large frame making the standard hospital furniture seem even more inadequate. You never did explain what happened with the Hargroves after I left, he said quietly. Raymond briefly recounted his conversation with father and son, the revelation about Thomas Hargrove's service with Raymond in Kuwait, and the photograph that had finally found its way home. No wonder the judge had a heart attack, Blackwood murmured. Finding out your entire understanding of your family history was wrong, losing your career and meeting a living legend who served with your grandfather all in one day. That's enough to stop anyone's heart. Raymond frowned at the living legend comment but let it pass. His focus was on Warren Hargrove Sr., who stood by a window staring out into the darkness, the weight of uncertainty evident in every line of his body. Hours passed in the timeless limbo of hospital waiting rooms. Other families came and went, their own dramas playing out in hushed conversations and occasional tears. Raymond remained steady as a sentinel, offering his silent support to a man he barely knew, connected by the thread of a shared past. It was nearly midnight when a doctor finally emerged looking for the Hargrove family. Warren straightened immediately, moving to meet her. Mr. Hargrove, I'm Dr. Patel. I've been treating your son. How is he? I see. The doctor's face revealed nothing. Your son suffered a significant myocardial infarction, a heart attack. We performed an emergency angioplasty to clear the blockage in his coronary artery. He's stabilized now, but the next 24 hours will be critical. Warren's shoulders sagged with a mixture of relief and continued worry. Can I see him? Briefly, he's heavily sedated and needs rest. Thank you, doctor. Warren turned to Raymond and Blackwood, who had risen to hear the news. I appreciate you both coming, but there's no need to stay longer. I'll call if anything changes. Raymond nodded his understanding, but instead of leaving, he surprised both Warren and Blackwood by asking, "Is there a chapel in this hospital?" "Second floor, I think," Warren replied, puzzled. Raymond turned to Blackwood. "You go ahead, Bill. I'll find my own way home." Blackwood studied his friend for a moment, then nodded. "Call me tomorrow, Ray. Our conversation isn't finished." After Blackwood departed, Raymond made his way to the hospital chapel, a small non-denominational space designed for quiet reflection. It was empty at this late hour, the only light coming from a few electric candles on a simple altar. Raymond wasn't particularly religious, but he had learned through hard experience that there were moments when a man needed to confront the deeper questions of existence. He sat in the front row, removed his cap, and closed his eyes. He didn't pray exactly. Raymond Mitchell's relationship with God had become complicated during his years of service. Instead, he sat in silence, sorting through the tumultuous events of the day and the unexpected resurgence of a past he had tried to leave behind. He was still there an hour later when Warren Hargrove found him. "I thought you might have gone home," Warren said, taking a seat beside him. "Not yet. How's your son?" "Sleeping. The doctor says his vital signs are improving." Warren was quiet for a moment before adding, "He's going to lose his position on the bench." Justice Klein made that clear before he collapsed. Raymond nodded. Actions had consequences even for judges. "He brought it on himself," Warren continued. "But I can't help feeling responsible in some way. The stories I told him about his grandfather, the resentment I carried all these years, it shaped him." "We all shape the people around us," Raymond observed, "for better or worse. But ultimately, each man is responsible for his own actions." Warren studied the lined face of the man beside him, a face that had witnessed more of life's brutality and beauty than most ever would. "You could have destroyed my son today. When you told us about my father, you could have used it to humiliate him further. But you didn't. Why, cool?" Raymond considered the question carefully. "Because your father wouldn't have wanted that, and because adding to the world's pain has never been my intention." Warren nodded slowly, accepting the simple wisdom in those words. "I should get back to him," he said, rising. "Thank you for staying, Colonel. It means more than you know." Raymond remained in the chapel after Warren left, the events of the day replaying in his mind. The confrontation in the courtroom, the revelation of his identity, the unexpected connection to the Hargrove family, and underlying it all, the memories that had surfaced after decades of careful containment. When he finally left the hospital, the night was deep and still. His motorcycle waited in the parking lot, a familiar constant in a day of unexpected changes. The ride home through empty streets allowed him time to process the wind against his face, clearing away the mental cobwebs that had accumulated during the long hours of waiting. His home was a small craftsman-style house on the edge of town, set back from the road and partially hidden by mature oak trees. The detached garage housed both his motorcycle and a workshop where he repaired antique clocks and other mechanical curiosities. It was a solitary life, but not a lonely one. Raymond had made his peace with solitude long ago. Inside, he moved through the familiar rooms with the ease of long habit. The house was sparsely furnished, but immaculately maintained, everything in its proper place. On the mantel above a fireplace he rarely used stood a row of photographs, the only personal touch in an otherwise utilitarian space. Raymond studied them now, faces from another lifetime staring back at him. Young men in desert camouflage, arms thrown around each other's shoulders, exhausted but alive. Many were gone now, lost to war or the passage of years. Thomas Hargrove among them. He opened a cabinet beside the fireplace and removed a wooden box, handling it with reverence. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay his medals, including the Medal of Honor that had triggered the day's events. He rarely looked at them, these symbols of a life that sometimes felt as if it had belonged to someone else. Tonight, though, he lifted the Medal of Honor from its resting place, feeling its weight in his hand. The pale blue ribbon was slightly faded now, but the stars still caught the light, reflecting it back in soft gleams. He remembered the day it had been placed around his neck by the president, the solemn ceremony, the words of praise that had made him uncomfortable even then. He hadn't wanted the recognition, hadn't felt he deserved it. The men who didn't come home, they were the ones who deserved to be remembered. Raymond carefully returned the medal to its case and closed the cabinet. The past was stirring again, demanding attention after years of quietude. He wasn't sure if he welcomed its return. Sleep eluded him that night. He sat in his workshop until dawn, repairing an antique grandfather clock that had been brought to him by a local history museum. The methodical work calmed his mind, the familiar rhythm of gears and springs, speaking a language he understood far better than the complexities of human emotion. Morning brought a call from Melissa Torres, the public defender, whose actions had set the previous day's events in motion. Mr. Mitchell, I just wanted to check on you after everything that happened yesterday, and to let you know that all charges have been formally dismissed. You won't need to appear in court again. Thank you, Ms. Torres. I appreciate your concern. There was a moment of hesitation on the line before she continued. I also heard about Judge Hargrove, the heart attack. Is it true? Yes, I was at the hospital last night. He's stabilized, but still critical. Another pause. May I ask why you went to the hospital? After how he treated you? Raymond's response was measured. Ms. Torres, in my experience, holding on to anger only destroys the vessel that contains it. Judge Hargrove will face the consequences of his actions without any help from me. That's very generous of you, Mr. Mitchell. Not generous, necessary, for my own peace as much as his. They spoke for a few more minutes, Melissa expressing again her admiration for his service and his dignity in the face of mistreatment. Raymond accepted her words with the same quiet humility he brought to all aspects of his life. After the call ended, he made his decision. General Blackwood deserved an answer to his invitation, and Raymond had always believed in facing difficult conversations directly. He dialed the number Blackwood had given him the night before. Ray, Blackwood's voice boomed through the phone. I was just about to call you. How's the judge? Stable, last I heard. Bill, about the Pentagon's invitation. You're going to turn it down. It wasn't a question. After 30 years of friendship, Blackwood knew him too well. Yes, I appreciate the honor, but public appearances ceremonies, that's not my path. Blackwood sighed heavily. I figured as much, but I had to try. You know they'll keep asking, especially after yesterday. Once the story hits the news, it won't, not if you can help it. Ray, a Medal of Honor recipient, being publicly humiliated by a judge, then vindicated in dramatic fashion. That's not a story that stays buried. Try Bill. For me, I've had my fill of spotlights. There was a long pause before Blackwood reluctantly agreed. I'll do what I can, but I want something in return. Raymond waited, knowing his friend well enough to anticipate the request. Dinner, once a month, just you and me catching up like old friends should. No Pentagon, no ceremonies, no public appearances, just two old soldiers sharing a meal. It was a small concession, and Raymond found himself surprisingly willing to make it. Deal, but no more five-star restaurants. I know a diner that makes a better steak at a quarter of the price. Blackwood's laugh rumbled through the phone. You never did appreciate the finer things, Mitchell. All right, your greasy spoon it is. I'll call you before I head back to Washington. The conversation ended on a lighter note than it had begun, but Raymond knew the matter wasn't truly settled. Blackwood would respect his wishes for now, but the general was nothing if not persistent. The Pentagon would find other ways to honor him with or without his cooperation. For now, though, Raymond had more immediate concerns. He had promised to keep the Hargroves updated on his condition, and a promise was a promise. Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital was quieter in the morning light, the emergency room less chaotic. Raymond made his way to the cardiac care unit on the 4th floor, where a nurse directed him to the appropriate waiting area. Warren Hargrove was there, dozing in an uncomfortable chair, his rumpled clothes suggesting he had spent the night. Raymond approached quietly, not wanting to disturb him, but Warren's eyes opened as if sensing his presence. Colonel Mitchell, he said, straightening and rubbing his face. Good morning. Mr. Hargrove, any change? Warren nodded, relief evident in his tired features. The doctor says he's stabilized. They're cautiously optimistic. He woke up briefly a few hours ago, recognized me, then went back to sleep. That's good news. Yes, they're going to move him out of intensive care later today if his condition continues to improve. Warren hesitated, then added, he asked about you when he was awake. Wanted to know if you were still here. Raymond raised an eyebrow. What did you tell him? The truth, that you stayed at the hospital until well past midnight and that you were in the chapel while I was with him. Warren studied him curiously. It seemed to give him some comfort, though I can't imagine why after yesterday. Perhaps because it showed him that people are more complex than he'd believed. That an old man he dismissed as delusional could show compassion for someone who treated him poorly. Warren considered this. Perhaps, or maybe he's just looking for redemption. Aren't we all in our own ways? The philosophical turn in the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a doctor, chart in hand. Mr. Hargrove, your son is awake again and asking for you. Warren stood immediately. Can I see him now? Yes, but only for a few minutes. He needs rest. The doctor turned to Raymond. Are you family as well? Before Warren could respond, Raymond shook his head. No, just a concerned citizen. I'll wait here. Warren followed the doctor through the secure doors into the cardiac care unit, leaving Raymond alone with his thoughts. He hadn't planned on seeing the younger Hargrove, had come only to check on his condition and offer support to his father. But now faced with the possibility of a direct encounter, Raymond wasn't sure what he would say to the man who had tried to strip him of his dignity just a day earlier. He didn't have long to consider. Within 10 minutes, Warren returned his expression thoughtful. My son would like to see you, Colonel. He was quite insistent. Raymond hesitated. Is that wise in his condition? The doctor says a short visit won't harm him as long as he remains calm. And I think, Warren paused, choosing his words carefully, I think he needs to see you to say something that can't wait. After a moment's consideration, Raymond nodded. All right. Warren led him through the secure doors and down a corridor lined with patient rooms. They stopped outside one where a nurse was checking vital signs on monitors beside a hospital bed. Judge Warren Hargrove, Jr. lay propped against pillows, looking pale and diminished, without his judicial robes and the authority of his bench. An oxygen cannula ran beneath his nose, and an IV dripped fluids into his arm. The man who had seemed so imposing in his courtroom now appeared frail and vulnerable. The nurse finished her checks and left, closing the door partially behind her to give them privacy. Colonel Mitchell, the judge said, his voice weaker than Raymond remembered. Thank you for coming. Raymond approached the bed and unsure of what to expect. Judge Hargrove, I'm glad to see you're improving. No thanks to my own stubbornness. He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The doctor says stress and unresolved anger contributed to my condition. Apparently holding on to grievances for 30 years isn't good for the heart. Few things worth learning come easily, Raymond observed. The judge studied him for a moment. You're a surprising man, Colonel. After what I did to you yesterday, most people would be celebrating my misfortune, not visiting my hospital room. I'm not most people. No, you're not. That's becoming increasingly clear. Hargrove shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. I need to say something to you, Colonel. Something important. Raymond waited, giving the man space to find his words. I've spent my entire life angry about my grandfather's disappearance. Angry that he wasn't recognized as a hero. Angry that other men came home with medals while he was just gone. Hargrove's voice caught slightly. I transferred that anger to every veteran I saw, especially those with decorations. It was wrong and it was unfair, and yesterday it led me to commit the most shameful act of my career. He took a labored breath before continuing. My father told me what you shared with him, about my grandfather's courage, about how he died saving others, including you. Raymond nodded once, acknowledging the truth of this. I also know that you stayed here last night waiting to hear if I would survive, after everything I did. Hargrove's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I don't understand that kind of forgiveness, Colonel, but I hope to learn from it. Raymond was silent for a long moment, considering his response. The judge's words seemed genuine, the remorse real. But Raymond had learned over a lifetime that words were easy. Actions revealed a person's true character. Understanding comes with time, he said finally, and with the willingness to see beyond your own perspective. Your grandfather was a hero not because of how he died, but because of how he lived. With honor, with courage, and with compassion for others. Those are qualities worth emulating, Judge Hargrove, more than any medal or public recognition. The judge nodded slowly, absorbing the gentle wisdom in those words. I've lost my position on the bench. Justice Klein made that clear yesterday. My legal career may be over entirely. One door closes, another opens. The question is whether you're watching the door that closed or looking for the one that's opening. A ghost of a smile touched the judge's lips. You sound like a fortune cookie, Colonel. Occupational hazard of growing old. Everything starts to sound like wisdom, even the obvious. The moment of levity eased the tension in the room. Judge Hargrove relaxed slightly against his pillows, the lines of pain in his face softening. "When I'm released from here," he said after a moment, "I'd like to talk more about my grandfather, to hear more about the kind of man he was, if you're willing." Raymond considered the request. Opening those old memories would be painful, but perhaps necessary, not just for the Hargroves, but for himself as well. He had carried Thomas Hargrove's story for 30 years. Perhaps it was time to share the burden. "I'd be willing," he said simply. The judge's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Colonel, for everything." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry, but the patient needs to rest now." Raymond nodded his understanding. "I'll be going. Take care of yourself, Judge. Recovery takes time and patience. Fortunately, you have both ahead of you." As he turned to leave, the judge called after him softly, "Colonel Mitchell, the medals, they're real, aren't they?" "All of them." Raymond paused in the doorway. "Yes, they're real, including the Medal of Honor." "Including that one." Judge Hargrove closed his eyes briefly as if absorbing a final blow. "I truly didn't know. I thought—" "What's done is done," Raymond interrupted gently. "Let it go, son, for your own sake as much as mine." With those parting words, he left the room, rejoining Warren in the hallway. The older Hargrove had been waiting, concern evident in his expression. "How did it go?" "As well as could be expected," Raymond replied. "Your son has some healing to do, and not just physically." Warren nodded his agreement. "The last 24 hours have shattered his understanding of the world. It will take time for him to rebuild." "Time is a gift we're not all granted. Tell him to use it wisely." They walked together toward the exit, two men connected by circumstance and shared history, an unlikely bond forming between them. "What will you do now, Colonel?" Warren asked as they reached the hospital lobby. Raymond considered the question. The events of the past day had unsettled the careful routine of his life, bringing the past surging back with unexpected force. General Blackwood wanted him to embrace that past, to share it with a new generation. The Hargroves wanted him to help them understand their own family history. And somewhere within himself, Raymond sensed a shift, a recognition that perhaps his self-imposed exile had run its course. "I'll go home," he said finally, "fix a few clocks, ride my motorcycle, and think about some things that have been too long ignored." Warren seemed to understand the weight behind those simple words. He extended his hand. "I hope we'll speak again soon. My family owes you a debt that can never be repaid." Raymond shook his hand firmly. "No debts between us, Mr. Hargrove. Just connections that were always there waiting to be discovered." As he walked out into the bright morning sunlight, Raymond Mitchell felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of possibility, of doors opening rather than closing. The past would always be with him, carried in his memories, and etched into his very being. But perhaps it was time to let it inform his future rather than define it. His motorcycle waited in the parking lot, faithful as ever. Raymond mounted it with the practiced ease of long habit, the engine rumbling to life beneath him, like a reminder that even old machines still had purpose, still had journeys ahead of them. As he rode through the streets of Oak Ridge, the town he had chosen for its anonymity now seemed different somehow. No longer just a place to hide, but potentially a place to build something new. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The Medal of Honor that had started this cascade of events remained in its case at home, a reminder of who he had been. But as Raymond Mitchell rode toward an uncertain future, it was not the medal that defined him, but the qualities that had earned it: courage, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right, no matter the personal cost. Those qualities had not diminished with age. They had merely been waiting like banked embers for the breath of circumstance to fan them back to life.